Hey, good morning. This is Mrs. Nickel again, here for your next installment of Science 7 with our new online learning environment. So today, I want to share a little bit about something that I really was interested in. When I was a kid, I actually used to have a dollhouse with miniatures. And so these actually weren't mine. I came into these more recently, but I had things like these tiny little plants and little baskets or a nice little spoon shelf, okay, um, or something like this tiny little pizza. And I used to collect miniatures. It was just really interesting for me to do that. And I've always kind of been interested with this tiny, tiny little world. And so a couple months ago, I actually read a book by Michael Crichton, and it was called Micro, and it was about these people that essentially got shrunk, kind of like Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, to go into a rainforest environment and be able to make scientific discoveries as tiny people. Now, we are going to do an assignment that really doesn't have tons to do with the book. Let me just turn on my Present Now screen. And let me see here. Okay, and so we are going to go in and, again, take a look at this slideshow and talk a little bit about this book. So the micro reading, this was written by Michael Crichton. So I'm using this based on copyright permission from HarperCollins. So why are we actually reading this intro? Well, it relates directly to our curriculum because one of the things that grade 7 students need to do is to kind of analyze or take a look at personal and public decisions and how it involves considering environmental impacts. And the fact that you need to have scientific knowledge to help inform you to make good decisions when it comes to how the decisions you make are going to have an environmental impact. And then we also have to illustrate with examples that there are limits to scientific and technological knowledge. And so when we try to, as people, manage environments, sometimes there are limits to what we're able to do. And it might be based on the fact that we just don't know everything. And so these are the kind of curriculum outcomes that we're going to cover today. So who was Michael Crichton? Just a little bit of a background. He started out as a doctor. He was also an anthropologist, and he taught anthropology at a few colleges and universities. So he was a teacher as well. But mostly he's more famous or more well known for being a writer, director, and producer. If any of you have seen Jurassic Park, then you know some of his work. He also was the writer for the hit show ER and lots of other kind of very popular sort of hit movies. And anyways, he definitely is someone who has strong opinions about a lot of things in science. And so it's really important whenever you are reading something that someone wrote, you need to understand and recognize what their bias is. So bias is kind of your viewpoint, the background, core values, the beliefs that you have that impact how you view the world. And so every scientist has their own bias. And that's why we often do double-blind studies or things that try and take out the bias. But we all view the world through a point of view that's been shaped by our past, by our present, and by our views about what's going to happen in the future. And so just to give you a little bit of background about Michael Crichton, I use the source for an actual meet and greet with the author that he'd done at a high school. And he shared in that interview that he had some very strong views about environmentalists. And he feels that they have a view of the world that's based on beliefs, almost like a religion, and not science, and that they've made many mistakes in trying to manage environments. And so he's very strong in speaking out about using a scientific approach so that we can do better about managing environments compared to what we're doing currently. And that we need to change whenever things in the environment change and whenever we learn new things. And so when we read this introduction from the book that he wrote, it's really important to keep in mind that this is his viewpoint, and we're going to be able to see some trigger words. some key things that he shares or key thoughts that he shares that show what his background opinion really is. And the reason I call them trigger words is because they're words that when we hear them, we kind of automatically react and we think, oh, he's trying to say that they're not doing something right. They trigger an emotional response in us. So, for example, at one point he says that the environmentalists have indoctrinated children. Now, when we think of the word indoctrination, that means we are kind of forcing our ideas on someone. We are teaching them what they need to think. And it doesn't always have a positive connotation. So when he uses the word indoctrination, it's a little bit of a trigger word. So we want to be looking for those things when we read through this reading. So about the book itself, it actually was released in 2011. And so he started writing it before he passed away in 2008. And so another writer by the name of Richard Preston finished off the book. And it was about some grad students who got lured to Hawaii to join a biotech company. And the biotech company was exploring and looking to pull out new resources, new chemicals, new technology from these kind of virgin environments or environments that hadn't really been explored by turning people into micro-sized so that he would shrink them down and they would have other technology that was shrunk so they could go down to the ground level and make new discoveries. Now, I am not recommending that you read this book until you're older. There is some graphic violence, there's definitely some mature content, and I don't think it's appropriate for grade 7 students. So when you're older, it's an awesome book, you should read it, but not in grade 7. I am not recommending it for right now. However, the introduction puts forward some really interesting ideas that I think are relevant to grade 7 students. So I'm going to read this out loud, but I would invite you to follow along with the words on the screen, and then you're going to have to answer the questions that follow. So here we go. Introduction. What kind of world do we live in? In 2008, the famous naturalist David Attenborough expressed concern that modern school children could not identify common plants and insects found in nature, although previous generations identified them without hesitation. Modern children, it seemed, were cut off from the experience of nature and from play in the natural world. Many factors were held up to blame: urban living, loss of open space, computers and the internet, heavy homework schedules. But the upshot was that children were no longer being exposed to nature and no longer acquiring a direct experience of nature. It was ironic that this should be happening at a time when there was in the West an ever greater concern for the environment and ever more ambitious steps to protect it. Now, indoctrinating children in proper environmental thought was a hallmark of the Green Movement, and so children were being instructed to protect something about which they knew nothing at all. It did not escape notice that this was exactly the formula that had led to well-intentioned environmental degradation in the past. The deterioration of American national parks being a prime example, and the American policy of forest fire prevention another. Such policies would never have been instituted if people really understood the environments they were trying to protect. The problem was that they thought they did. One can argue that the new generation of school children will emerge even more certain. If nothing else, school teaches that there is an answer to every question. Only in the real world do young people discover that many aspects of life are uncertain, mysterious, and even unknowable. If you have a chance to play in nature, if you're sprayed by a beetle, or if the color of a butterfly wing comes off on your fingers, if you watch a caterpillar spin its cocoon, you come away with a sense of mystery and uncertainty. And the more you watch, the more mysterious the natural world becomes, and the more you realize how little you know. Along with its beauty, you may also come to experience its fecundity, which just means its ability to reproduce, its wastefulness, aggressiveness, ruthlessness, parasitism, and its violence. These qualities are not well conveyed in textbooks. Perhaps the single most important lesson to be learned by direct experience is that the natural world with all its elements and interconnections, represents a complex system, and therefore we cannot understand it and we cannot predict its behavior. It's delusional to behave as if we can, as it would be delusional to behave as if we could predict the stock market, another complex system. If someone claims to predict what a stock will do in the coming days, we know that person is either a crook or a charlatan. If an environmentalist makes similar claims about the environment or an ecosystem, we have not yet learned to see him as a false prophet or a fool. Human beings interact with complex systems very successfully. We do it all the time, but we do it by managing them, not by claiming to understand them. Managers interact with the system. They do something, watch for the response, and then do something else in an effort to get the result they want. There is an endless, iterative interaction that acknowledges we don't know for sure what the system will do. We have to wait and see. We may have a hunch we know what will happen. We might be right most of the time, but we are never certain. Interacting with the natural world, we are denied certainty and always will be. How then can young people gain experience of the natural world? Ideally, by spending some time in a rainforest, those vast, uncomfortable, alarming, and beautiful environments that so quickly knock our preconceptions aside. And he signed it off, not finished. Michael Crichton, August 28, 2008. So I want you to go back through the reading and I want you to answer the following 5 questions. And you're going to answer these on Google Docs or in a Microsoft Word document, and then you're going to submit them as an assignment by the end of the week. So first of all, I want you to go back through the reading, and I want you to write down a statement in the reading that you agree with, and tell me, why do you agree with it? Then I want you to find a statement in the reading that you disagree with, and tell me, why do you disagree with it? I want you to go back and I want you to see if you can pull out one or more of those trigger words that the author uses to show his bias and his point of view. And if you forget what his bias or point of view is, you can go back earlier in the slide or watch the source document that I have linked there. Then I want you to take less than an hour, okay? So I don't want you to spend too much time on this, but I want you to go onto the internet and see if you can find an example of an environmental area that actually was saved or preserved because people have managed it really well. And then I want you to see if you can find an example of an environmental area that was ruined because people tried to manage it and then they actually made things worse. So I want you to submit these answers to D2L with the title Micro Questions by Friday, okay? Now, do your best to answer these questions as completely as you can. If you really can't find something, or you just say, you know, I looked and I wasn't able to find something, just make sure you tell me that too. But make sure you don't take too much time, but at the same time, think about these questions as much as you can. Try and do a good job to see that you can really think through and analyze how people make decisions about environments and about managing them, and think about some of the successes that we've had in society and some of the failures that we've had too. So that's your exploration for this week. I hope you guys kind of enjoy looking through this, and anytime you read something online, anytime you do research, always take a look at the source. Consider the bias, consider their viewpoint and where they're coming from. And maybe you agree with it, maybe you don't agree with it, but it's really important sometimes to read ideas through a different point of view. It's almost like looking at light through a prism or through a lens, and different colors will come out of it. Those are the different viewpoints. But if we combine all of those different viewpoints and all of those ideas, it can help us get a fuller or more complete picture, like the full experience of light, if we're willing to kind of consider other people's opinions that don't necessarily match up with our own all the time. All right, so good luck with this assignment. If you have any questions, make sure you email me, and don't forget to like this video and subscribe to my channel. Thanks. Have a good day.